Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, here we are again. Another mining bill that may well have adverse impacts on our farming communities presented for debate in this parliament in November. It is like clockwork, Mr Speaker, that we have these experiences, and it seems that when the headers come out of the shed, the bills also come out of the drawers of the Department of Energy and Mining for presentation to this parliament for our consideration. This, you may remember, in fact I'm sure you do remember, Mr Deputy Speaker, has been a long-standing passion of mine, this issue. I've had quite a bit to do with the battle between mining and farming on agricultural land over the 7 years that I've been in here, and that has been most famously exemplified by my crossing the floor in November of 2018. Now you might note that date, Mr Deputy Speaker, that was in November. That was when the previous Liberal government presented a mining bill to this parliament to significantly change the land access arrangements that farmers had to endure when a mining company approached their land. So that was the most famous example of my interaction with this issue, and on that occasion, we were able to get that debate delayed until February. We did so on the basis that it was the middle of harvest, the farming community was out there in their headers attempting to feed the nation, and that they were unable to partake in the debate or influence the outcome because they were otherwise engaged in reasonably important pursuits. Well, that was a wonderful decision by that parliament. It was made possible, of course, with the support of the then Labor opposition. They were the ones that supported that motion to adjourn debate to February on the basis that it was in the middle of harvest. In fact, the now Premier was the person who amended the motion to ensure that it was moved to February. So to see this bill now put before this parliament in November again, despite having had that lesson presented to this parliament 4 years ago, is incredibly disappointing. What's more, the previous iteration of that bill that we successfully adjourned off to February was presented to the parliament in November of 2017. So these bills just seem to keep coming before the parliament in November, in the middle of harvest, whilst the farming community can't have its proper interaction and say on the outcome of the bill. Now, you may well call me a conspiracy theorist. I can see the minister giggling in such a way, but maybe once or twice it might be a coincidence. 3 times not so, I'd say, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I wonder whether, I might ask the question in committee, whether we might consider putting this off till February or after the election as well, on the same basis that the last mining bill that was presented to this parliament was. Well, I think that would be a wise idea. And I think it's got some merit because the website that's advertising this piece of legislation on the department website is also identifying that there'll be a far more broad suite of reform that will be coming after the election. Mr Speaker, I've written some notes about it. I quote from the website: A broader suite of reform in respect to the Mining Act may be considered for a legislative program in the new term of government following the March 2026 state election. So why don't we just tie them all in together? Why don't we present these 4 or 5 changes that are presented to the parliament now at the 11th hour of this government? Why don't we tie them all into the bill that seems to be forthcoming following the March 2026 election? It would, of course, as the minister just alluded to, allow all parties and participants to take their positions to the election. It would allow all of us who have formed strong positions on this issue in the past to repeat our bona fides to the community that have elected us previously to see if they are still important issues to them. And it would allow us not to have to rush this bill through Parliament because, Mr Speaker, you would be well aware, we, at the conclusion of today's sittings, will have 5 days left of Parliament, not including the optional sitting week. That would, in my view, constitute a rushed bill that goes through this place and an undesirable outcome for such an important piece of legislation. So I would submit to this parliament and to the government that perhaps we would be wisest to, in the same spirit that we did in the last iteration and in the last November effort, put this off until February, until after harvest is completed, until after the election has been conducted, so that we can properly interrogate all the different parts of it. But while we await an answer to that idea that's been put, and I'm sure it has been given proper consideration in the halls of power as we speak right now, but while we can wait an answer to that idea, I'd like to address what we do have before us now. And what we have before us has been advertised as an effort to give certainty. And that is an interesting word that I'd like to touch on just that little bit further. This word certainty, will presumably be only to the benefit of exploration companies. They will now be able to operate with the certainty that there is unlikely to be any danger to their exploration licence ever expiring. As best I can tell now, the Minister has the absolute discretion to grant 5-year extension after 5-year extension to an exploration licence without any end date in sight. There is, of course, and I'm sure in the rebuttal we'll hear that there is, of course, some criteria that the minister is able to consider in making his decision to exercise his discretion, but he's certainly not constrained by it. He's certainly not obliged to consider those criteria. And if he decides to exercise his discretion in another way, that is a matter entirely for him. It's a matter entirely for any future minister that comes and occupies his position. So I think whilst that criteria that we find in the bill is certainly a thing that we might put forward to the farming community as desirable and to ease their minds, ultimately what we have here is a discretion that is 100% up to the minister to exercise and completely within his power to do so. And I can quote from the second reading speech, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker. The minister retains absolute discretion to refuse an application for a special circumstance exemption. So at the end of the day, I would contend that those criteria are not worth the piece of paper that they're written on. But on the other side of the coin, of course, where the exploration companies get absolute certainty that they'll be able to operate in perpetuity, farmers get the opposite. They get the uncertainty that they'll have an exploration licence hanging over their head forever. Well, that is a theoretical possibility. There's a theoretical possibility that there will be 5-year extension granted after 5 years, and that exploration licence and that operator will be there in perpetuity. So these are the two sides of the coin that we must consider. The certainty given to the exploration company comes at the expense of the uncertainty now bestowed upon the landowner. And this, of course, was a key theme in the Select Committee report that this Parliament and a committee of it therein worked assiduously on at the end of the last Parliament. I disseminated that when I shared my amendments with everyone, the key passage from that Select Committee report, which was made possible, of course, with the then member for Frome, now member for Stewart, and chaired quite ably by him. And it was the burden that was being borne by landowners with mining licences was quite clear to see from everyone we spoke to. So that certainty, whilst good for explorers, I think will come at the expense of landowners. I will now touch on those couple of amendments. So where the bill will allow for an indefinite number of extensions theoretically to be granted to an exploration company, I propose, and I will propose when I move the amendment, that it will be limited to 1 2-year extension. That will give an exploration company 20 years total, hard cap, to turn their exploration project from an idea to a mining licence. That, I would contend, Mr Deputy Speaker, is more than enough time for these companies to go about their business and determine whether it would be a profitable and economic venture for them to undertake. That amendment will come in 2 parts, and I intend to move both of them regardless of the outcome of the other, and I will be seeking the Parliament's support in so doing. There were other amendments I would have liked to have moved had I had more time, but this bill was presented to the Parliament just approximately 2 weeks ago, and I had my briefing about 8 days ago. Mr Deputy Speaker, that has not been enough time for me to properly consider the ramifications for a number of amendments, but I do note that there will be some in my community and others who would have liked for me to go even harder on some amendments in line with my previous positions. I would like to make quite clear that there are other amendments I would have liked to have moved, and chief amongst them, as a headline, I think this would have been a tremendous opportunity for the government to instil a mining ombudsman or commissioner or a land access ombudsman or commissioner. It has just happened in New South Wales where we have an ag commissioner who will be able to adjudicate on complaints that are filed to the mining department, and now would have been the perfect time to present one to South Australia. Because another key finding that came out of that Select Committee report, which was tabled in Parliament some 4 years ago, was that there is an inherent conflict with the mining department being both the promoter and regulator of mining in South Australia. That was a key finding of the Select Committee report, and something that came up time and time again as we moved around the state and listened to different farmers who felt that they weren't being heard by the umpire when there was a break in the rules. Well, now we are proposing that the minister will have the power to revoke a mining or an exploration licence or a mining licence should the breach of the terms and conditions of that licence be so egregious to justify it. That, I think, would be a power better bestowed on an independent umpire rather than a minister of a member of the government. I think this would have been a wonderful time to separate the promoter and regulator, to enable the regulator to be an independent umpire so that we could have consistent, transparent and universally trusted across both the mining and farming sector regulation conducted. Because we will now inevitably have questions quite rightly or wrongly, about whether a government had a preference for a different operator, whether there was different treatment given to a different breach of the terms and conditions, whether one was allowed to continue, the other was barred from doing so, or vice versa. I can foresee that there will be problems coming, or at least the perception of conflict coming for the mining department as they attempt to adjudicate on issues presented to them by the farming community. So I would have liked to have presented an amendment like that to establish a commissioner or an ombudsman so that farmers could present their complaints to an independent umpire and have faith that the process was being conducted free from any interference from a party or organisation that wanted to see mining promoted in our state. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to conduct that properly, but it will be something that I continue to pursue in the lead up to the election in March. And it's something I've pursued since the Select Committee and since the issue became quite topical in my electorate. There is quite a bit more I'd like to say, but in the interest of time, I'll wrap up. I will be opposing this bill, Mr. Speaker, if both of my amendments don't pass. I've referenced a couple of times the Select Committee that we formed, or that was formed, I should say, as part of the deliberations in this House in the last Parliament. It would seem to me that multi-partisan committee that was set up in large part thanks to the current government, that did some incredibly thorough work across the state, met with a large number of people, as Hans Hub will now be able to attest to, the work that Select Committee did. It seems to me that the findings from that committee have been summarily ignored. There doesn't seem to be anything that has come from that Select Committee report that was tabled in this place that has managed to find its way into the next iteration of the mining bill. And I think that's incredibly disappointing. For those farmers that turned out across the state, that were able to present their ideas, and we heard some genuinely heart-wrenching grievances presented. We heard some genuinely heart-wrenching grievances presented, and to have none of those find their way into this bill is incredibly disappointing, and might I say, possibly even somewhat offensive to those people that turned out. Also, Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact that a number of farming industry groups put submissions into the consultation for this bill specifically, and as best I can tell, none of those suggestions were picked up either. So those submissions have been ignored, and it presents, Mr. Speaker, to borrow some words from a different author, a serious failure of consultation and accountability that reinforces fears that the reform process has been designed primarily to facilitate new mining activity rather than to protect South Australian ag, environment and community. And that was said by the Limestone Coast Sustainable Futures Group, and I know that they put a submission in, and I'm disappointed that their feedback wasn't taken into account, or at least didn't form part of the final product. So on those bases, the fact that it's going through in the middle of, in November at least, right in the middle of harvest, as all mining bills seem to do, the fact that the Select Committee report didn't make it into its final copy after so much work was put in by so many across the entirety of the state, and finally on the basis that those farming communities that did put in submissions to the consultation on this bill haven't had their voices feature in the final product. On the basis of that, unless my two amendments pass, I'll be inclined to oppose the bill as well, and take forward to the election my position that it is well time for an ag commissioner, for a mining on ag land commissioner, or for someone to assume these responsibilities of the independent umpire to make sure that complaints from farmers and landowners about misgivings or malpractice that occurs on their land is properly heard and properly adjudicated on, and that they can get a fair hearing, and hopefully some of these are held to account.